The transport ship shuddered violently as another wave of the ion storm struck its hull. Commander Sarah Chen grabbed the nearest safety rail, her knuckles white from the grip. Across the bridge, the tall, silvery figure of Zarkax maintained his balance with practiced ease, his four-fingered hands flying over the control panel. "The engines are failing," Zarkax announced, his voice carrying the musical tone typical of his Velexi species. "We must abandon ship." Sarah wanted to argue, but the flashing red warning lights and blaring alarms told her he was right. As the ship's xenobiologist, she knew her place wasn't on the bridge, but the storm had caught them while she was delivering her weekly report to the Velexi diplomatic envoy. The ship lurched again, and this time even Zarkax stumbled. His bioluminescent markings pulsed with anxiety, a detail Sarah might have found fascinating under different circumstances. "Escape pod," she said, pointing to the emergency exit. "We need to go now." They ran through the corridors as the ship broke apart around them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but years of emergency drills kept her moving. Zarkax reached the escape pod first, his longer legs giving him an advantage. To her surprise, he turned and helped her inside before sealing the door. The pod ejected just as a massive explosion tore through the transport ship. Sarah watched through the window as their vessel split in two, scattering debris across the star-filled void. The sight of other escape pods brought her a moment of relief. At least some of the crew had made it out. But their problems were far from over. The ion storm that had damaged their ship now played havoc with the pod's navigation systems. Through the chaos, Sarah caught glimpses of a planet below. Nexus 7, if she remembered the star charts correctly. "We're being pulled into the atmosphere," Zarkax said, his silver skin reflecting the pod's emergency lights. "The landing will be difficult." Sarah almost laughed at his understatement. Nexus 7 was infamous among xenobiologists for its hostile environment and dangerous wildlife. No one had successfully established a permanent settlement there, though the ruins of various attempts littered the surface. The pod entered the atmosphere at the wrong angle, heat building up around them as they descended. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed to whatever might be listening. She felt a strange touch on her arm and opened her eyes to find Zarkax's hand resting there, his bioluminescent patterns creating a gentle, calming glow. The gesture surprised her. Velexi were known for avoiding physical contact with other species, especially humans. Their empire's strict laws about interspecies relationships were legendary. As a diplomatic envoy, Zarkax would have spent his career enforcing those very rules. The moment ended as they hit the ground. The impact threw them against their restraints, and Sarah's head snapped forward. For a few seconds, everything went dark. When her vision cleared, Sarah found the pod resting at an angle. Rain drummed against the hull, and something that looked suspiciously like acid had begun eating through the front viewport. Through the dissolving glass, she could see a landscape of twisted purple vegetation under an orange sky. "We need to get out," she said, already unbuckling her restraints. "That acid rain will breach the hull soon." Zarkax nodded, his movements quick and precise as he gathered the pod's emergency supplies. "There appears to be a structure approximately 2 kilometers east," he said, checking the pod's damaged sensors. "Possibly remnants of the failed mining operation." "Better than staying here," Sarah agreed. She pulled on an environment suit from the pod's storage compartment and handed another to Zarkax. The suits were designed for human use, but the Velexi's slender frame managed to fit inside one. They waited for a break in the acid rain before making their exit. The moment they stepped outside, Sarah's training kicked in. The air was breathable, barely, but the high oxygen content made everything more flammable. The gravity was slightly higher than Earth standard, making each step require extra effort. Something roared in the distance, the sound echoing across the alien landscape. Sarah instinctively moved closer to Zarkax, then caught herself. The Velexi diplomat pretended not to notice, but his skin patterns flickered briefly. "We should salvage what we can from the crash site," she suggested, pointing to where pieces of their transport ship had fallen. There might be supplies we can use. Agreed, Zarkax said. But we must be quick. This planet's sun will set in approximately 3 hours, and the native predators are primarily nocturnal. They worked efficiently, gathering medical supplies, food rations, and communication equipment. Sarah noticed that despite his diplomatic background, Zarkax knew how to handle himself in a crisis. He moved with purpose, prioritizing essential items and watching their surroundings. The roar came again, closer this time. Sarah looked up from the supply crate. She was examining and saw movement in the purple vegetation. Something large was stalking them. Zarkax, she whispered, slowly reaching for the emergency beacon in her pocket. I see it, he replied, his voice equally quiet. There are 2 more approaching from the left. We must reach the mining facility. They began walking faster, trying not to run. Sarah's xenobiologist training told her that running often triggered predatory instincts. The creatures followed, occasionally visible through gaps in the vegetation. They looked like a cross between Earth's extinct terror birds and lizards, with scales that shifted color to match their surroundings. When the first creature charged, it was Zarkax who saved them. He pushed Sarah behind him and activated something on his wrist device. A high-pitched sound filled the air, and the creatures backed away, shaking their heads in distress. Sonic deterrent, he explained as they hurried toward the mining facility. Standard Valexi diplomatic security measure, but its power supply is limited. They'd reached the facility just as Zarkax's device died. The building was old but solid, its walls made of reinforced materials designed to withstand Nexus 7's hostile environment. Sarah found a control panel, and after several tense minutes of work, managed to power up the facility's basic systems. The doors sealed behind them with a reassuring hiss. Through the facility's grimy windows, they watched the predators prowl outside before finally losing interest and moving away. We are safe for now, Zarkax said, his skin patterns slowly returning to their normal steady glow. But we should examine the facility's systems and establish a secure perimeter before dark. Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to their bigger problems. They were stranded on one of the most dangerous planets in known space. Their only shelter was an abandoned mining facility, and she was stuck with a member of a species known for their dislike of human contact. As if reading her thoughts, Zarkax turned to her. Commander Chen, he said formally, I believe our survival will require us to set aside certain cultural differences. Agreed, Sarah replied, managing a small smile. And please, call me Sarah. I think we can skip the formalities while we're fighting for our lives on a deadly planet. Zarkax's skin patterns shifted in what she hoped was agreement. Outside, Nexus 7's orange sun began to set, casting long shadows through the purple vegetation. Their first night on this hostile world was about to begin, and Sarah had a feeling it would be the first of many challenges they would face together. The abandoned mining facility creaked and groaned in the night wind. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through their salvaged supplies under the pale glow of emergency lighting. Across the room, Zarkax studied the facility's old computer systems, his natural bioluminescence providing extra light. 3 days had passed since their crash, and they had fallen into an uneasy routine. During the day, they explored the facility and gathered resources. At night, they took turns keeping watch while the planet's predators prowled outside. The communication systems are damaged beyond repair, Zarkax announced, stepping away from the console. But I have managed to restore power to the facility's basic functions. Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Well, at least we have shelter. And look what I found in the medical supplies. She held up a small device. It's a portable sterilizer. We can use it to clean the facility's water supply. Zarkax moved closer to examine the device, and Sarah noticed how his natural glow brightened slightly. She had started to recognize different patterns in his bioluminescence. This particular one seemed to indicate interest or curiosity. Clever, he said. I would not have recognized its purpose. You humans have a remarkable ability to find creative solutions. Before Sarah could respond, a massive thunderclap shook the building. Through the reinforced windows, they watched as lightning turned the purple landscape into day for brief, stunning moments. The storm had been building all afternoon, and now it had arrived in full force. The facility's weather shields are failing, Zarkak said, checking a monitor. We should move to the lower levels. They gathered their essential supplies and headed downstairs. The lower level was a single large room that had once served as the miners' living quarters. Old cots lined the walls, and a common area sat in the center. It was more secure than the upper level, but also colder. Sarah shivered as another thunderclap rattled the building. To her surprise, Zarkax retrieved a thermal blanket from their supplies and offered it to her. Your species is more susceptible to cold than mine, he explained. When she accepted the blanket, his fingers briefly brushed against hers. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through her hand. Thank you, she said softly. Would you like to sit? You must be tired from working on the computers all day. Zarkax hesitated for a moment, then settled beside her on one of the old couches. His silver skin caught the light from the emergency lamps, creating shifting patterns that reminded Sarah of Earth's northern lights. May I ask you something? She ventured. When he nodded, she continued, I've noticed you're different from other Velexi I've met. Less distant. Zarkax was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, his skin patterns shifted to a deeper blue, a color she hadn't seen before. Perhaps it is because I have spent more time studying humans than most of my kind, he said. In my role as diplomatic envoy, I observed many things that made me question our traditional views. A particularly loud thunder crack made Sarah jump. Without thinking, she moved closer to Zarkax. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. Like what? She asked, genuinely curious. Your adaptability, for one. Velexi society values order and tradition, but humans embrace chaos and turn it into opportunity. It is both fascinating and frightening to my people. Sarah smiled. And here I've always been fascinated by your species' ability to communicate through bioluminescence. It seems so much more elegant than verbal communication. Yet you have already begun to read my patterns, Zarkax observed. His skin flickered with what Sarah thought might be amusement. Most non-Velexi never noticed them at all. The storm intensified, and the temperature dropped further. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around herself, trying to suppress another shiver. After a moment's hesitation, Zarkax's body began to emit a gentle warmth. Another Velexi ability, he explained, seeing her surprised expression. We can regulate our body temperature to suit our environment. It helped us survive on our homeworld's varying climate zones. It's wonderful, Sarah said, feeling the warmth spread through her side of the couch. Then she noticed his skin patterns had shifted to a new color, something like sunset pink. Was that embarrassment? A loud crash from above made them both jump. Water began dripping through the ceiling. Thankfully normal rain, not the acid variety that sometimes fell on Nexus 7. The upper level's structural integrity is compromised, Zarkax said, standing. We need tow. Before he could finish, Sarah was already moving. She grabbed empty containers from their supplies and began placing them under the leaks. Zarkax watched her for a moment, then joined in, his height allowing him to reach places she couldn't. They worked together smoothly, as if they'd been a team for years instead of days. When the last container was in place, Sarah found herself standing close to Zarkax, both of them slightly out of breath. See, he said quietly, adapting to chaos. Sarah laughed, and after a moment, Zarkax made a musical sound that she realized was his species' version of laughter. It was beautiful. They spent the rest of the storm swapping stories. Sarah told him about growing up in Seattle, where rain was a constant companion. Zarkax shared tales of his childhood on the Velexi homeworld, describing crystal cities that changed color with the seasons. "I always wanted to be an explorer," he admitted, "but my family's position in society meant I was destined for diplomatic service. And yet here you are, exploring one of the most dangerous planets known to both our species," Sarah pointed out. True, his skin patterns shifted to that sunset pink again. "Though I must admit, the company is better than I expected." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the comment. She was saved from responding by a familiar sound, the hunting cry of the predators they'd encountered on their first day. "They're hunting in the storm," she said, moving to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see shapes moving in the darkness. Zarkax joined her at the window. "They are adaptive, like your species." His hand rested on the wall near hers, close but not touching. "Perhaps that is why this planet has resisted all attempts at settlement. It requires one to be both structured and chaotic, planned and adaptive, like a human and a Valexi working together," Sarah suggested. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw something shift in Zarkax's expression. His skin pattern swirled with colors she hadn't seen before, deep purples and soft golds that seemed to dance across his silver skin. The moment was broken by another hunting cry, closer this time. They spent the rest of the night in comfortable silence, watching the storm and keeping an eye on the predators. When morning finally came, Sarah realized something had changed between them. They were no longer just two crash survivors working together to stay alive. They had become something else, something that would have been forbidden in normal circumstances. But here on Nexus 7, normal rules didn't seem to apply. As they prepared for another day of survival, Sarah caught Zarkax watching her, his skin glowing with those new, undefined colors. She smiled at him, and for the first time since the crash, she felt truly warm despite the facility's chill. Sarah knew something was wrong before she opened her eyes. Her body felt heavy, and her skin burned with fever. She tried to sit up, but found even that simple movement exhausting. "You must rest." Zarkax's voice came from nearby. His cool hand touched her forehead, and she leaned into the contact. "Your temperature is dangerously high." The events of the previous day came back slowly. They had been exploring the new section of the mining facility, looking for spare parts. Sarah had cut her hand on a rusty piece of equipment. It had seemed like such a small injury at the time. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her throat dry. 14 hours, Zarkax replied. His skin patterns pulsed with worried colors, deep blues and anxious greens. "I believe you have been infected by an indigenous parasite." They were mentioned in the facility's old medical logs. Sarah tried to focus on his face, but her vision kept blurring. "That's not good," she managed to say. "No, it is not." Zarkax's voice carried an emotion she hadn't heard from him before. Fear. The logs indicate that several miners died from similar infections, but they did not have access to Valexi biology. Through her fever haze, Sarah watched as Zarkax's skin began to glow brighter. The patterns of light changed, becoming more intense and organized. He placed his hands on her shoulders, and she felt a strange tingling sensation spread through her body. "My species' bioluminescence isn't just for communication," he explained softly. "It also has medical properties. We use it to fight infections and heal injuries. I've never attempted this with a human before, but—" "I trust you," Sarah whispered, and she meant it. The glow from Zarkax's skin intensified until it filled her vision. The light seemed to sink into her, fighting the burning sensation that plagued her body. Sarah felt herself drifting, but this time it wasn't the heavy pull of fever. It felt more like floating in a warm ocean. She didn't know how much time passed. Sometimes she would wake to find Zarkax still beside her, his skin glowing as he fought her infection. Other times she caught glimpses of him hurrying around the room, preparing medicines from their salvaged supplies or checking the facility's defenses. During one of her more lucid moments, she heard the familiar cry of the predators outside. "You need to rest," she told him. "You can't keep watch and heal me at the same time." "I must." he replied simply. His voice sounded strained. The predators are more active than usual. They can sense your weakness. Sarah wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled her back into sleep. This time she dreamed of silver lights dancing under her skin, of cool hands touching her face, of a musical voice speaking words she didn't understand but somehow felt in her soul. When she finally woke fully, the fever had broken. Zarkak sat slumped in a chair beside her, his normally bright skin dim with exhaustion. Without thinking, Sarah reached out and took his hand. His eyes opened at her touch. "Your temperature is normal," he said, his voice rough but relieved. The colors in his skin brightened slightly. "How do you feel?" "Better," she said, squeezing his hand. "Thanks to you." Zarkax looked down at their joined hands. In normal circumstances, such contact between their species would be strictly forbidden. But he didn't pull away. "I was concerned," he admitted. "When you fell ill, I realized." He stopped, his skin flickering with those sunset pink colors she had come to recognize as emotional uncertainty. "Realized what?" Sarah asked softly. Before he could answer, an explosion rocked the facility. They broke apart as alarms began blaring throughout the building. "The acid rain storage tanks," Zarkax explained, helping Sarah to her feet. "The pressure must have built up too much while I was distracted." They hurried to the upper level, Sarah still unsteady but determined to help. The scene that greeted them was chaos. One of the facility's storage tanks had ruptured, sending highly corrosive acid eating through the floors and walls. "We need to seal off this section," Sarah said, her xenobiologist training kicking in. "If that acid reaches the power core." They worked together, using the facility's old emergency systems to close blast doors and redirect the acid flow. The work was dangerous. One splash of the acid could be fatal, but they moved in perfect synchronization, anticipating each other's actions without words. When the crisis was finally contained, they found themselves trapped in a small control room. The acid had cut off their access to the lower levels, and the room's only window showed the planet's deadly surface, now bathed in the light of both its moons. "Are you all right?" Zarkax asked, noticing Sarah's pale face. "Perhaps you should sit." His words cut off as Sarah suddenly hugged him. For a moment he stood frozen. Then slowly, carefully, his arms wrapped around her. "I thought we were going to die," she whispered against his chest. "First from my infection, then from the acid." "I would not have let that happen," Zarkax said firmly. His skin was glowing with those deep purples and soft golds she had seen before, but now they were stronger, more defined. Sarah pulled back slightly to look at him. "What do those colors mean?" she asked. "I've been trying to understand your patterns, but these ones." Zarkax's hand moved to her face, his touch feather-light. "These patterns," he said slowly, "they are ones that Valexi only show to those they care for deeply. They are considered extremely private." Sarah's heart beat faster. "And you're showing them to me." "It seems I cannot help it," he admitted. "When you were ill, I realized that the thought of losing you was unbearable. It goes against everything I was taught, every rule I was sworn to uphold. But this time it was Sarah who moved first, standing on tiptoe to press her lips gently against his cheek. She felt his skin warm under her touch, saw his pattern swirl with bright, joyful colors. The moment was interrupted by a familiar roar from outside. They turned to see several predators gathering below the window, drawn by the commotion of the acid leak. "We're trapped here until the acid dissolves," Sarah said, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Not with Zarkax beside her, his skin still glowing with those private, precious colors. "Then we will face it together," he said, taking her hand. "Like everything else on this planet." They settled in to wait out the danger, closer now than ever before. Outside, Nexus 7's predators prowled and its acid rain fell, but inside their small sanctuary, something beautiful and forbidden was blooming. Something that would change both their lives forever. 2 weeks after Sarah's recovery, They made a discovery that should have brought them joy. Instead, it filled them both with a strange sense of dread. The long-range transmitter, Sarah said, staring at the device they had uncovered in a sealed storage room. It looks intact. Zarkax ran his fingers over the old machinery, his skin patterns shifting between hope and what Sarah now recognized as sadness. With some repairs, we could signal for rescue. They stood in silence, the implications hanging heavy between them. Rescue meant returning to their societies. It meant rules, regulations, and the strict laws that forbade relationships between humans and Velexi. We should repair it, Sarah finally said, though her heart ached at the words. It's the right thing to do. Zarkax nodded, but his skin had dimmed to colors she'd never seen before, deep, sorrowful purples that made her want to reach out and hold him. So she did. He wrapped his arms around her immediately, all pretense of proper Velexi behavior forgotten. These past weeks had changed them both. Every shared danger, every quiet moment, every secret touch had brought them closer. We have time, he murmured against her hair. The repairs will take several days at least. A distant rumble interrupted their embrace. They looked out the window to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Another acid storm approaching. We should secure the facility, Sarah said reluctantly, stepping back. This looks worse than usual. They worked together to seal all windows and doors, checking the repairs they'd made after the last acid leak. As they worked, their hands would brush, lingering longer each time. Sarah noticed Zarkax's skin patterns had shifted to those private colors again, the ones meant only for those he cared for deeply. The storm hit just as they finished their preparations. Acid rain hammered against the facility's outer walls, while lightning illuminated the purple landscape in brilliant flashes. They retreated to their usual shelter, the small control room that had become their favorite spot since the acid leak incident. Tell me about your home, Sarah said as they sat together, closer than proper protocol would allow. What would happen if we returned and they knew about us? Zarkax finished her thought. His skin rippled with concerned patterns. I would lose my position, of course. Possibly face exile from diplomatic service. But you, he touched her face gently. You could face worse consequences. The Velexi Empire does not look kindly on those who break their laws about interspecies relationships. Sarah leaned into his touch. And if we didn't tell them? Lie. Pretend nothing has changed. His skin flashed with distress. I don't think I could. Every pattern of my skin would betray my feelings for you. The storm outside intensified, but they barely noticed. They were lost in their own world, facing the reality of their situation. I'd studied human biology extensively, Zarkax continued softly. Did you know that when humans are in love, their pupils dilate, their heartbeat accelerates, their body temperature rises? His hand moved to her wrist, feeling her pulse, like yours is doing right now. That's not fair, Sarah whispered, using your scientific knowledge against me. You do the same, he replied, amusement coloring his patterns. I've seen you documenting my color changes in your datapad. Sarah blushed. I am a xenobiologist, professional curiosity. Is that what this is? Zarkax asked, his voice taking on that musical quality she loved. Professional curiosity. Rather than answer, Sarah gathered her courage and kissed him. For a moment, he went still with surprise. Then his skin erupted in a dazzling display of colors. Joy and love and desire, all mixed together in swirling patterns of light. When they finally parted, the storm outside had grown even stronger. The facility creaked and groaned under the assault, but neither of them paid it any attention. That was, Zarkax's voice trailed off as his skin continued to glow with new, beautiful patterns. Inappropriate, Sarah suggested, smiling. Revolutionary, he corrected, pulling her closer. A loud crash from somewhere in the facility broke their moment. They jumped up, years of training taking over despite their distraction. The East Wing, Sarah said, checking the facility sensors. The acid rain found a weak spot. They rushed to the location, finding acid eating through one of the older sections of the facility. Working together, they managed to seal off the affected area, but not before losing access to some of their supplies. The long-range transmitter. Sarah realized suddenly, we need to check if it's safe. They made their way to the storage room, finding it untouched by the acid. The transmitter sat there, a reminder of the choice they faced. We could wait, Zarkax said quietly. Claim we never found it. Sarah turned to him, seeing the struggle in his glowing patterns. Would you really be happy, hiding away here forever? With you? Yes. His answer was immediate, certain, but you deserve better than a life trapped on a deadly planet. So do you, Sarah said, touching his face. His skin glowed under her fingers. You deserve to be who you really are, not who your society demands you be. They stood there, holding each other as the storm raged outside. Finally, Zarkax spoke. Then perhaps we should not hide. His patterns shifted to something new, determination mixed with hope. Perhaps it is time for both our societies to change. What are you suggesting? That we repair the transmitter, that we signal for rescue, and that when they come, we face whatever comes together, openly and honestly. Sarah felt her heart swell with love for him. This was the Zarkax she had come to know, thoughtful, brave, and willing to challenge traditions when they needed challenging. It won't be easy, she warned. Nothing worth doing ever is, he replied, using a human phrase she had taught him. His skin patterns danced with affection and determination. But think of others like us, Sarah. How many humans and Velexi deny their feelings because of these outdated laws? Perhaps our experience here, surviving together on this deadly planet, could show both our peoples that we are stronger together than apart. Sarah kissed him again, feeling his skin warm beneath her touch. When they parted, they both knew their decision was made. Together, they began working on the transmitter. Outside, the acid storm continued to rage, and somewhere in the darkness, predators prowled. But inside, two beings from different worlds had found something stronger than any storm, more powerful than any law. Love that could bridge the gap between stars. The rescue ships appeared as tiny dots in Nexus 7's orange sky. Sarah and Zarkax stood at the facility's window, watching them descend. Their hands were clasped together, his skin glowing with a mix of love and anxiety. Two ships, Sarah noted, one human, one Velexi. The transmitter signal reached both our peoples, Zarkax said. His skin patterns shifted to show his determination. Are you certain about this? Sarah squeezed his hand. During their months stranded on this deadly planet, she had memorized every color pattern of his skin, every musical note in his voice. She had never been more certain of anything. No more hiding, she said firmly. The rescue ships landed outside the facility's main entrance, their engines stirring up clouds of purple dust. Sarah and Zarkax waited by the airlock, still holding hands. They had decided to face whatever came together. The outer door opened, and rescue teams in environmental suits rushed in. There was a moment of confused silence as both human and Velexi rescuers took in the sight before them, their missing people standing together, clearly more than just survivors. Commander Chen, the human rescue leader, stepped forward. Thank God you're alive. When the transport ship was destroyed, he stopped, finally noticing how Sarah and Zarkax's hands were intertwined. Behind him, the Velexi rescue team's skin patterns showed shock and disapproval. Diplomatic envoy Zarkax, the Velexi leader said in their musical language, "You forget yourself. Release the human at once." But Zarkax's grip only tightened. His skin blazed with those private colors, the ones meant only for those he loved. But now he displayed them proudly before everyone. "I forget nothing," he replied in standard language so all could understand. "I remember who I am more clearly than ever before." The rescue teams looked at each other uncertainly. This was obviously not the situation they had expected to find. Sarah stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "Before you take us anywhere, you need to understand something. What Zarkax and I found here on Nexus 7 isn't just about survival. We discovered that the barriers between our species are artificial. We're stronger together." As if to prove her point, a familiar roar echoed from outside. The planet's predators had been drawn by the rescue ship's landing. Through the facility's windows, they could see the creatures circling. "We survived here for a month," Zarkax added. "Not despite our differences, but because of them. Human adaptability complemented Valexi's strength. Our different ways of thinking helped us solve problems neither species could handle alone." "This is irregular," the Valexi leader protested, their skin patterns showing confusion. "The laws are clear." "The laws are wrong," Zarkax interrupted. His voice carried all the authority of his diplomatic training. "I say this as someone who once enforced those laws. They are based on fear and misunderstanding, not truth." Sarah noticed some of the younger Valexi rescuers' skin patterns showing interest rather than disapproval. Even some of the human team members were nodding slightly. "Look around you," Sarah gestured to the facility. "See how we've survived here, on a planet that defeated all previous attempts at settlement. We did it together. And," she took a deep breath, "we fell in love." The word hung in the air. The Valexi rescuers' skin patterns rippled with various emotions, while the humans shifted uncomfortably. "Love." The Valexi leader's patterns showed disbelief. "Between species? Impossible." In response, Zarkax began to glow with his full range of love patterns, the colors swirling across his skin in a beautiful display. Sarah recognized them all now. Joy, devotion, protection, desire. Several of the younger Valexi gasped, their own skin patterns responding unconsciously to the depth of emotion being shown. "Not impossible," Zarkax said softly, "just unprecedented. Like many great discoveries in both our histories." A sudden crash from outside made everyone jump. The acid rain had started again, and the predators' cries were getting closer. "We need to evacuate now," the human rescue leader said urgently. "This planet isn't safe." "No, it isn't," Sarah agreed. "But it taught us something valuable. Sometimes the most beautiful things can grow in the deadliest places. Sometimes it takes facing death together to realize what truly matters in life." The rescue teams hurried them toward the ships. To everyone's surprise, Sarah and Zarkax refused to be separated, boarding the human vessel together. As they strapped in for takeoff, they could hear the rescue teams communicating with their superiors, trying to explain the unprecedented situation. "There will be consequences," Zarkax said quietly as the ship lifted off. Through the window, they watched Nexus 7's hostile landscape fall away beneath them. "I know," Sarah replied, "but we're not alone. Did you see how some of the younger Valexi reacted? And I've known other humans who questioned these laws. We might have started something important." Zarkax's skin glowed with hope. "A revolution. A revolution through love." Sarah smiled. "Much better than one through war." 3 months later, Sarah stood before the Combined Species Council, presenting their experiences on Nexus 7. Zarkax stood beside her, his skin patterns proudly displaying their love despite the disapproving looks from some council members. But they had supporters too. Their story had sparked discussions throughout both societies. Other human Valexi couples had begun coming forward, tired of hiding. Young members of both species demanded change, arguing that cooperation and understanding were the future. On Nexus 7, Sarah concluded her presentation. "We learned that survival sometimes means letting go of old fears. Evolution means embracing new possibilities. And love doesn't care about species or laws or traditions. It grows where it will, as unstoppable as life itself." She felt Zarkax's hand slip into hers, his skin glowing with those beautiful private colors that had become a symbol of change. Together, they had survived a deadly planet. Together, they would help build a future where love knew no boundaries. Outside the council chambers, Nexus 7 still orbited its orange sun, wild and deadly and beautiful. But it had given the universe something precious, proof that even in the deadliest places, love could bloom, and with it, hope for a better future. The revolution they started wasn't fought with weapons or won with force. It was a quiet revolution, sparked by two people who dared to love across the stars. And slowly but surely, it was changing both their worlds, one heart at a time.